Instead of saying, hey, let's continue to acquire every client, here's the client cost. We can acquire X amount a year. I'm like, well, shoot, if we want this goal, then we're going to do it this way. And that's really like when you and I have talked about clarity a lot. I always ask people, well, what's the goal, right?
Yeah.
If you're like, hey, I just want to make 100 grand and have it be semi-passive.
Yep.
Okay, here's a strategy that can do that. But if you're like, I want to build enterprise value and I want to do this and I want to be able to get my time back and I'm willing to put in the hard work, that's a different strategy. So if you can start with the right strategy, a lot of times I find that buying the business fits that a lot better than not.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, a podcast for purpose-led entrepreneurs looking to master the art of buying, selling, or optimizing small businesses. Your host, Chris Seegers, founder of Exceptional Companies and author of Selling Main Street, has over a decade of experience starting, buying, and leading successful businesses. He's here to guide you through the complex world of business transactions and growth. Each week, we dive deep with actionable insights, expert interviews, and real-world strategies to activate and equip you to live exceptionally and build exceptional businesses. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Here's your host, Chris Seegers.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, where we discuss how to buy, sell, and optimize your business. I'm your host, Chris Seegers, and I've got my guest who is recurring, Tato. She's back again. Tato, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, guys. Thank you. I am doing amazing. This is the best way to cap off my day. I'm very excited to be here.
I love it. We've already done 4 or 5 podcasts. We're going to keep doing it at least once a month if you can make enough time in your schedule for me, because I love everything that comes out of the conversations. We've got a lot of questions from clients on the advisory side. You've got a lot of people that you're helping coach just personally on how to buy, and optimize businesses. It's 2 questions that tie in together. One is, why would you buy a business instead of building one? And the other one is, how do I buy a business that's not a job? So I want to start on why you buy a business as opposed to starting one. And I'll give a story. We coached a young guy who was a plumber, a master plumber, and he was just going along, growing a little business and really struggling. And I had sat down with he and his brother and just said, hey, would you ever consider buying a business? And his reaction was so visceral. It was like, you're so crazy. Like, why would I do that when I can get all the work for free? And I was like, okay, well, what are your goals? Are you scaling fast enough? Do you have the team? Are you doing everything? What's your cash flow like? And I started just kind of asking some questions about where he wanted to go. And by the end of it, he was like, okay, I know I need to buy a business, and ended up buying a business within 6 months and is looking for another one. So what are some of the thoughts you've had, Tato, as you think about starting or buying or building a business, why you would do one or the other?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny the example you gave, because I feel like that person, like when I hear licensed master plumber, all I think is leverage and skill. Like that person has such a specific sought after skill set. I mean, he could do anything. He absolutely could buy that business, hit the ground running with it right away. My own experience, I always tell people, like, I'm relatively skill less. I'm great on soft skills, but like I didn't have a specific hard skill. Oh, I'm a CPA, so I'm going to go buy an accounting firm. Like I was jealous of those people. Like that's so obvious, And so when I hear about instances like that, I'm like, wait, this is insane. I was wishing to be that person and still am in a lot of ways, because it feels like my acquisition would be made 10x easier. But I was talking to a close friend not too long ago who's seriously considering leaving the armed forces for entrepreneurialism and potentially business acquisition. We had this exact conversation. He was like, I don't see myself going into the corporate grind. He's an officer in the Marine Corps, so he's not afraid of, long days, gruel, hard work, what have you. And he was literally considering buy versus build, the concept, the book, etc. And fortunately, he had just recently seen a really good friend of his try to start a supplements business from scratch. He said that first and foremost, not doing well at all. Probably, an understatement, but very much not looking to repeat what his friend had done. And so he was hoping to learn from me and various other resources a little bit more about acquisition. And I was kind of asking like, oh, why did your friend decide to do that? What's not working, et cetera. And he had said, well, he's really passionate about the space. And so that's the space he wants to work in. And so, he decided to build something. Okay, first and foremost, like that specific space is so saturated, right?
Oh, yeah.
So to break into it fresh just feels like a massive uphill battle. This was not the gentleman I was talking to. I was talking to his friend. I would ask the supplement gentleman why he didn't seek out potentially purchasing, one of the companies already on the market, right? You can still
Can
work.
can I pause you right there? So myth number one that I want to chat about, it's way riskier to buy a
Yeah.
business than to start a business.
Yeah. Total myth.
So keep going, but that's what I'm kind of hearing out of what you're saying.
Yeah. And maybe that would have been his answer, right? I haven't had the opportunity to ask him. I don't know this person, but that would be the first thing I would ask. I'm just curious, why build something from scratch if maybe you could seek out a deal that you could afford in the space that you want to be in? And yeah, I absolutely think that somebody will say, then I have to go get a loan for it. And what if it doesn't work out? I could just build my thing from scratch, have very little downside risk, and be okay if it doesn't work out, which I can understand that point of view. But I think that's sort of setting yourself up for expected failure in a sense.
And I think it really devalues your time. Your time is the most valuable asset in the world. Now, sweat equity is a real thing, and I've done it, you've done it. It's important. But I also, the older I get, I'm like, man, my time is so valuable. And
Yeah.
if I can find people leverage or capital leverage
Yep.
or data leverage, I want to use that every single time to
Absolutely.
accelerate the path to my dreams.
I think that if you told me I could only have one reason, buy versus build, I would choose awareness. And what I mean by that is people can't buy anything from you if they aren't aware that you exist, right? Building that awareness, growing that awareness is so challenging and takes such a lengthy runway and amount of time. Unless you're going to become like an overnight internet sensation, which happens, 1 in 100,000 or what have you. Speaking to the power of awareness, good or bad. The business that I bought from a very, very old and grouchy person, was running it, hating every day of his life, and hated all of his customers, and more or less made them feel that way and know that every day. It's a somewhat of a niche product. They didn't have a lot of options. The point I'm trying to make is I would venture to say the company and the brand had a less than favorable viewpoint in the eyes of those who knew of the brand that I took over, but the awareness piece was there. I had lots of people knowing that we existed and knowing that we were an option, but we had that awareness. And so then all I had to do was focus on changing their experience, improving their experience, leaving a better taste in people's mouths, and letting the word spread. Wow, I can't believe that brand has turned around the way that they have. Either, we use them and we're so much happier, or yeah, I've heard that. Interesting. We should give them a try.
Yeah,
We should
100%.
consider
So
that.
buying reputation, right? So you're basically buying like a decade off of your time a lot of times.
Yes.
And one of the
100%.
things, so we're working on a couple roll-ups in the financial advisory and insurance space and thinking through that. And as I talk to, it could be financial advisors, insurance people, whatever, any industry. I actually did a talk on this 2 weeks ago. I was like, everyone's trying to acquire a client, right? We're spending money on marketing and advertising. I'm like, I don't want to acquire a client. I want to acquire 100 clients.
Yeah.
And then I want to thin it to 50 incredible clients. And I want to figure out how to create more value for them to where they'll pay me more for the things we're doing. And I would rather acquire 100 clients than, hey, our team is organically growing. Now, we're still going to do both strategies. But when we find those opportunities, I'm all about it. I mean, we're buying another insurance business and we're going to grow by 40% in one cut. And this is an awesome business, high integrity, high reputation. And our existing team can handle that entire business without any additional infrastructure.
Yeah.
So we're getting a lot more efficient on that side. And instead of saying, hey, let's continue to acquire every client, here's the client cost, we can acquire X amount a year. I'm like, shoot, if we want this goal, then we're going to do it this way. And that's really like you and I have talked about clarity a lot. I always ask people, well, what's the goal, right?
Yeah.
If you're like, hey, I just want to make 100 grand and have it be semi-passive.
Yep.
Okay, here's a strategy that can do that. But if you're like, I want to build enterprise value and I want to do this and I want to be able to get my time back and I'm willing to put in the hard work, that's a different strategy. So if you can start with the right strategy, a lot of times I find that buying the business fits that a lot better than not. And I love that story that you shared because the majority of our buy-side clients are ex-military. And they're like, you know what? We're going to have a pension, but it's really not going to make us thrive. It's kind of survival. And we've got all these leadership skills. We are willing to do all the hard things.
Yeah.
How do I apply that? And I'm like, you apply it to the marketplace.
Yeah.
You'll have a lot to learn because the military is way different than the marketplace, but there's a lot of similarities. So what are some other myths about buying versus building that you've seen?
I think that the term myth ties together in a bow the two things we're talking about, buy then build, and then also buying a job. I would venture to say that it is a myth to say that you failed if you buy a job. I think that a lot of the literature or the consumables will tell you if you buy a job, basically you failed. I can understand what's meant by that, but when I am approached for advice, I really try to drill into people that for some period of time, this has to be, in my opinion, your only focus. Like you need to be consumed by it, learn it, understand it, figure out what the goal is with it. And that's going to require you to be there largely full time. And I don't think that that's a bad thing at all, right? Like really ingraining yourself in the business and understanding it. I personally feel is the only way that you can figure out where the business is going and therefore where you're going with it, whether it's semi-passive or whether it's to keep acquiring and do roll-ups, etc. I have a lot of respect for people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and get dirty with their business for a year, 2, 3, whatever the timeline is. And so it's frustrating when you hear podcasts give you advice of like, well, hire yourself out right away. I definitely agree that you have to value your time at its highest dollar amount, like what you said earlier. That's 1,000,000% true. But you're not a loser if you're sitting there knee deep in the systems and processes of this business that you bought for some
100%.
really
Can I hop in there?
Yeah.
So here's one of the differentiators that I've tried to coach on. Okay, so we got 2 paths, right? Path 1 is a job, right? You're an employee. Path 2 is you're working in your business for a period of time, right? Path 1, you learn very little, right?
Oh,
You're learning your job, right? You're just like, hey, I'm doing this one thing and I'm doing this one thing and I'm doing this one thing. Zero enterprise value. There's a whole story, but let's just talk about the things you learn. Path 2, you have a job. Let's say you work it for a while and you're like, this is too small. I'm going to sell it and go bigger. Now you have the skills.
Yes.
Right? That's the value. The cash flow is actually not the value. That's a byproduct. The enterprise value is not the value. That's a byproduct. Knowing the skills of how to manage people and processes and how to create a profitable business, that translates to every area of your life. We've used EOS and we created this tool called the one-page life plan out of that, where it's like a business plan for your life. And we see it the same way. I'm like, all the skills I learned in business, I can now directly apply to my personal life.
So like personal example / vulnerable moment. When I acquired my business, believe it or not, I had never managed a single person for any minute of any day of my entire corporate career. I was never a people manager, just wasn't my job. So when I then woke up one day and acquired a general labor business that was largely immigrants who didn't even speak English, to say I was a fish out of water is a drastic understatement. But I say all of this because a lot of the advice I would get is, we'll just find somebody to manage those people. It's not bad advice, right? It would have caused me to keep my hair color and probably not drink so much. But this morning, I had an uncomfortable conversation during an employee review. I dreaded it. I hated it when it happened. But every time you finish one of those uncomfortable interactions or tough conversations or hard fill in the blank, you're a little bit better. You're a little bit stronger. It's just like going to the gym. You finish a hard lift session, you dread it going into it, you hate it while you do it, you leave that much stronger. It's the same thing. And so like, I wouldn't trade for a minute all of the slog that I've gone through to really force myself to learn how to manage people, general labor. It's just a whole other class of humanity because it's a life skill. Like you said,
for sure.
Every day I'm like, wow, like I become such a better communicator. I don't know, like approachable person, I guess, a more like grounded in perspective, like person. And I wouldn't have had that if I had just been like, oh, I got to go find somebody to manage these people. It's like you totally skip the meat and potatoes of like what the opportunity is.
Yeah. And I would say too, like even people that are employees that are in positions of leadership and management, it is fundamentally different when you're paying the paychecks. When you're the one that's like, man, if I hire this person, they could sink my company if they do something that creates a huge liability or whatever. That changes everything. I was a C-suite at a company and hiring a bunch of people, and it's like, okay, this is great, but I didn't have my own like 100% of my capital and my family's house on the line. And so I became a lot more intentional on how we interview and our blueprint for success of how we hire and how we onboard. The thing too is once you get that skill, you build that process out. That's when it's the appropriate time to bring somebody in to do that. Because you're like, hey, here's how we hire. We start with our core values and culture fit first, which is the exact opposite of everybody else. So then you can coach somebody and say, here's our core values. Here's our culture. You've worked with us. This is the type of person we're looking for. Here's the questions. Here's the blueprint. Here's the personality assessments. And then you go. And even on that, like we use personality assessments as one gauge. And I was talking with a guy who's going to be the largest rancher in Colorado. He's brilliant. He's one of my good friends. And they've started hiring a bunch of people because they are growing dramatically. And I was like, man, you should try using personality assessments as kind of just a red flag indicator. And he's like, well, walk me through that. And I'm like, okay, here it is. There's 4 personality traits that most of these measure. And I just took a piece of paper out. Here's the 4 traits: autonomy, social ability, pace, rule following, etc. And so tell me who you need in this job. Well, I need this, I need this, I need this. And I drew it out on a piece of paper and was like, okay, this is the type of person within some sort of standard deviation that would fit that. And so if you've got 7 candidates and you're like, hey, I need somebody who's all type A and attention to detail, and you get someone who has no attention to detail, and you're like, they interviewed really well. It's like, well, you should probably ask them these questions and call their employer and ask these specific questions.
Yep, absolutely.
And so doing that, literally, I've done those hundreds of times. That gave me the skill to where I can pull up one of those and say, yeah, this person should work, or they probably could work, but we need to dig in more. And we need to really understand their background and their upbringing and their work ethic and some of the other softer things.
Yeah.
But I learned that skill by doing it. And now it's something that I can literally talk to anybody about and say, hey, why don't you try this? So I love that. I would say like the skills, if the myth is like, hey, being an employee or working for yourself and working way more hours, but you make the same amount, the value is in the skills. So what other things, as you think about buying a business as opposed to starting, one thing that came to me, and this is why I try to encourage people to go bigger, because we have a couple businesses that were too small, but cash flow. Right? Like that is one thing that like, I'm always like, guys, starting a business, and we just started our advisory company last year, cash flow, right? So now we're running this whole thing, buying technology, paying people without any cash flow. Had there been one advisory company in the entire country that I thought had an actual good approach to doing this, to helping people buy and sell businesses, I would have bought it, but there wasn't one. I'm like, okay, we have to build this thing.
That's a whole other podcast. Yes.
Actually, we should do a whole nother podcast on that, because that space is hilarious to me, and we're doing some big things there. But
do you like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss an episode by clicking the subscribe button now, and check out our website, www.excoadvisors.com. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about cash flow.
I feel like I am the poster child for what not to do when you first buy a business in every facet. But I was wildly undereducated about what cash flow really meant when all of a sudden you're in the driver's seat. And like you said, it's your house on the line. It's your cash on the line. Growing in general is expensive, but when you buy, you at least have a hopefully cash flowing platform upon which to grow. Versus like what you're mentioning, you were growing an advisory business basically from the ground up. You were taking in $0 and outflowing how many ever dollars to grow that thing. I had a cash flow crunch in a big way at the beginning for lots of different reasons, but money was coming in the door, right? Regardless of whether it ever hit my pocket, it was at least hitting the pockets of employees. It was hitting the pockets of vendors. It was hitting the pockets of the people you needed not to shut down. If you're going to build something from scratch, you need to be pretty clear on how much that's going to cost per week, per month, what have you, and figure out how many weeks or months runway do you have available to you? Because when it's gone, it's probably gone, unless you have some sort of cool, unique situation.
Let's hop in there too, Tato, because that's a great point, is financeability. Right? So like you start a business and let's use a supplement company. You go to the bank and you're like, hey, I need to borrow $500,000 because I want to start this thing and it's just me and an idea. They're like, no, thank you. You go to a bank and you say, hey, I've got this company and I want to buy it. And they're like, oh, there's all these SBA products and commercial debt and all these other things. And you're like, also, I'd like to wrap in a line of credit or some operating capital. Just about to say
this. You make a really good point that I hadn't considered. That was the first thing I did. Literally week 1. I was like, cool, thanks for financing my purchase. And also you see that I bought this way under value. You see the value here, the physical assets that we have that you can take as collateral. And I got a $50,000 line of credit day one. Nice. That's still intact today, that I draw for sometimes regularly, sometimes occasionally, depending on what it is that I'm up to. That has been literally no joke business saving in some instances.
And that's the piece that I like, is you get instant cash flow. Even this plumbing company that we're going to buy, I'm going to wrap in probably $750K of cash.
Yeah.
And if we don't need it, we don't need it. But you know what? Like we may need to buy a truck. We may need to
Yep.
hire another person.
Totally.
We may just have a vendor that doesn't pay us on time. And we're like, you
Yep.
know what? We know the money's coming, but we've got to float it. And that just gives you this flexibility. Whereas if you have a startup, you might just get to the point where you're like, we just ran out of every dollar. Like the dollar is gone and now I have to go back to being an employee. So it gives you a little bit of leverage there. The
Yep.
other thing too is you're getting a team. Now, the team may not be great, but you're getting some infrastructure there.
Yep. Somewhere to start.
Yeah, somewhere to start. And honestly, like with all the businesses we bought, I don't know if there's probably some like specific ratio, but I would say like 30% of the team doesn't make it. And most of them self-select out, right? Because we come in and we cast this huge vision. Hey, we're going to activate and equip others to live exceptional lives. We're going to build this great business. But hey, also with that, we have accountability. Yep. And we have processes. And every week we're going to measure these things. And you're going to have a scorecard. And we're going to meet weekly and quarterly and annually. And this company is going to grow. Here's the plan. We're going to hit it. And pretty soon there's people that are like, I don't want that. Either they don't want the accountability or they're like, you know what? I actually hate this industry. I want to go do this other thing. And it's like, oh, sweet. You should do that. Yep. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think too. And I guess maybe this is like kind of tough because if you start a business within a realm that you either know a ton about or are really passionate about, then maybe this is less applicable. But there are so many amazing employees who have incredible knowledge about the industry or company in which they work, that if you have the privilege of acquiring that business and retaining that employee, there's a world of things to learn from them. And so that's maybe a little bit less tangible. And like I said, maybe only applicable to certain amounts of deals.
You know what's really interesting though on that, Tato, is like, as we think about, we're going to build a vertically integrated GC company. And so as I think about like this plumbing company does a lot of commercial work, the next is going to be a residential service play. But I talked to my partner and I was like, you know what? I would even buy a failing company that's got a couple good master plumbers and a decent client list. And we'll pay the owner, hey, we'll pay you 50 grand or 100 grand. You're going to shut this thing down anyways. You've already run it into the ground, but you've got some team and we'd love to bring them on board, keep them well paid. And you've got some clients that if we show up and do a good job, they're ready to roll again. There's just a lot of ways to think about buying businesses instead of just the traditional, like, it's got to be this thing. And to touch on the thing that you just mentioned, I had a conversation with a guy from the military last week, and he asked me the question, what type of business should I buy? And I was like, man, I honestly don't even care. Like, I look at the financials first and I'm like, okay, is this a good deal, right? Is this a deal that can be financed? It cash flows. I like it. They got the people and processes at least. And then I look at the industry and say, okay, is this growing? Is this an area I want to be in? But I said, I would first think about, give me 100 industries, right? That you like, hey, I would buy any of these industries if it was the right fit. And I think people get a little bit focused on, like you said, hey, I have one niche. I'm really good at this one thing. And it's like, well, that's going to serve you a little bit in the business, but the skills you have to learn are the skills of running a business and being a business owner. And so you could be a master engineer and not know any of the rest of it. And it's like, that kind of works, but buying an engineering firm doesn't mean you'll be more successful than buying a porta potty company.
I know I said this on another podcast, but I am going to say it again because it is such a point to drill home. Early on in my venture, I came to you because I was struggling and you are my sage and detailing whatever issue I had. And your response to me was, Tato, the truth is that with some exception, every business is basically the same. And at the time, that comment infuriated me. And I was like, he doesn't understand and he didn't listen to anything that I just said for the last 37 seconds. Because I was just too close to my own stuff. I was, a little bit business immature, what have you. I needed to grow a little bit, but now I see how true that is. And it ties in perfectly with what you're talking about. Like you said, within some standard deviation, every business is the same. So.
It really is. And I, as an encouragement, we have a commercial ranch. We have a hunting outfitting business. We have a shipping company, an insurance company, financial advisory, oil and gas, plumbing. Like, we have things that are so across the board. People are like, what do you do? And I'm like, look, it's people, processes, and profits. Like, it's the 3 Ps. And so if I can get those right in any business, it's going to be successful. And I can tell you, when we're running our ranch, I'm using the same processes there in a little bit of a different way than I do in our insurance company or in our oil and gas company. And I think that'd be something to be an encouragement to younger entrepreneurs, is find business principles that are timeless and stick to those. And you can find the books that are out there that have been around forever, like Think and Grow Rich and How to Win Friends and Influence People, a lot of Jim Collins work, and just read that stuff and do those things. Like Traction, the EOS system, if you just ran that, if you're like, hey, I'm just going to do EOS, and you put it on a company and you did it for 10 years and you stuck with it, you would be very successful. And it's not like any rocket science thing. And it's just, once again, having clarity. How big do you want to go? What's your vision? Like, is it just, hey, lifestyle business, or I want to do $1 billion company? And that's going to guide that. But business principles are written into the architecture of life. They're timeless. What works and what doesn't work will always be the same, no matter what the industry does. So it's really interesting. Sweet. Okay. Any parting words of wisdom or new things you're exploring, or tools or books or ideas? What else do you want to leave with our listeners?
You were just talking about, you were running through a couple of, like, I feel like that, like, Bible books, if you will, like the books that like everybody reads because they're just timeless. This isn't innovative, but I only newly became familiar with Atomic Habits. It was amazing. Loosely related here, but I feel like what I really took from it was like 1% better. The book
100%.
covers a lot, but 1% better. And so applicable to those who are buying or building, but buying. I think about that a lot. I'm like, okay, today I only need to be 1% better, because every day compounds. And I feel like that was a concept that I wasn't really familiar with until super recently, but it can apply to every area of what you're doing. Be super, super powerful.
That book is the Bible on habits and psychology. We use it for all of our employees. When we coach our team on habits and time blocking, that is the book we use. I mean, I read it every year because it's so good. And that's the thing. It's like, hey guys, if you want to have a successful life, have good habits, understand what your identity is, what your purpose is, and your core values, and you can do this. That's a massive resource. Tato, I love hanging out with you. I love having these conversations. We're going to do a lot more of them. Thank you for coming on again, and we're going to catch up soon.
Amazing. Sounds good.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Exceptional Companies Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you liked this show, please reach out through our website, www.excoadvisors.com, for free tools, to order a copy of Selling Main Street, or to sign up for our free webinar on how to sell your Main Street business.